Rhaenyra. It's not hard to understand why the viewers of House of the Dragon feel such a strong sense of empathy towards Rhaenyra's character. The show has depicted her in such a likable way that it almost demands the audience's compassion. This is because the writers remove most of Rhaenyra's negative traits from the book and replaces them with more positive ones on the show. In House of the Dragon, Rhaenyra is shown to be kind and considerate, loving and compassionate, and she can even be just and merciful as well, all of which are likable traits that are the complete opposite of how she was described in Fire and Blood. In the novel, Rhaenyra is a far more complex character, intelligent and portrayed as a loving mother still, but also politically ambitious and ruthless in her pursuit of power. The latter traits actually influence her decision-making, and Rhaenyra commits a lot of heinous acts to protect her claim and that of her children. For example, she orders the capture of Vaemond Velaryon, and she has him fed to her dragon once he's brought to her. She can be ruthless and murderous, unafraid to use the power of fear to gain a political advantage. However, in House of the Dragon, Rhaenyra is innocent of Vaemond's death. The writers don't want to portray her as a ruthless tyrant hungry for power, so they tone that aspect of her character down in order to make Rhaenyra more appealing to the general audience. Some book readers will try and defend this, saying that the way that Rhaenyra was described in the book is actually biased because it was written by the Maesters. Since the Maesters were so against the Targaryen dynasty, it actually makes sense that they would embellish certain details about the story and try to portray Rhaenyra as an evil monster. But the show goes a step further by completely denying her involvement in events that couldn't have been fabricated. At the end of the day, Vaemond died and Rhaenyra was responsible for it. All sources agree about that fact. However, the show denies Rhaenyra's involvement completely because they don't want her to be seen as a murderous tyrant by the general audience. They even remove important characters and events from the story that could potentially make Rhaenyra look bad. For example, they've removed the character of Nettles entirely in order to get rid of Rhaenyra's jealousy and murderousness towards her. Important characterizations that will impact the ending of the story. Nettles' character wasn't just a figment of the Maesters' imaginations. They didn't just make her up in order to smear Rhaenyra. Therefore, it's clear that the writers have only removed her character because they are committed to whitewashing Rhaenyra's, stripping her of all her moral complexities and flaws, even though they are important aspects of her depth and agency in the story. In Fire and Blood, Rhaenyra's decisions and actions impact the war. It is implied that she consented to the sending of the assassins Blood and Cheese to kill Aegon's son as revenge for the deaths of her son, Luke, her father Viserys, and her daughter Visenya. After this event, it's said that the war began in earnest, and that the time for writing letters and making peace was gone. All of this makes sense because, in the book, Rhaenyra is described as being petulant, quick to anger, and slow to forgive. Therefore, seeking revenge for the death of her father and children by killing her enemy's son is something that she definitely would have consented to. She definitely could have ordered that assassination, or at the very least, allowed for it to happen. But of course, on the show, Blood and Cheese is portrayed to be an accident, completely orchestrated by Daemon alone. Rhaenyra has no part in the conspiracy, nor does she even approve of it. Her desire for revenge is stripped away from her, and she's more concerned about the death of a child, even though her own was just killed a fortnight ago. So why do the writers do this? Why do they even try to whitewash Rhaenyra's character so much in House of the Dragon? I think that the answer to this question is Daenerys Targaryen. The writers of the show are obsessed with Daenerys. You can tell that they really like that character and that they are trying to turn Rhaenyra into another version of her. That is why they say that Rhaenyra's dragon's eggs are the ones that become Daenerys' dragons in the future, and it's the reason why there are so many similarities between the two characters as well, even though none of these things are canon. For example, Rhaenyra's motivations on the show are kind of similar to Daenerys' ones in the book, in that she is mostly motivated by a prophecy instead of being motivated by personal ambitions like in Fire and Blood. In A Song of Ice and Fire, Daenerys has many visions that motivate her to pursue the Iron Throne, and she is also supposedly the hero Azor Ahai reborn. And Rhaenyra is portrayed similarly in House of the Dragon. She too is motivated by the prophecy of ice and fire, and she is also depicted as important in the sense that the chosen one, Azor Ahai, shall come from her bloodline. This idea is reinforced by adding scenes of visions within the story. The writers insert these signs throughout the series to reinforce Rhaenyra's divine purpose. But all of this is done to draw a parallel between her character and Daenerys' one, because the writers are absolutely obsessed with that character. However, this doesn't really work because Rhaenyra is nothing like Daenerys, and vice versa. And this is something that the writers do not understand. Daenerys grew up in poverty, hungry and afraid. She and Viserys were constantly running from assassins and conspiracies their whole lives, seeing enemies in the shadows and placing their trust only in each other. They were mocked their whole lives, laughed at and belittled everywhere that they went. The lords that did welcome them only sought to use them for their own ends, and eventually, even Viserys sought to use Daenerys at the prospect of retrieving a stolen crown. He was abusive towards her, and eventually sold her into slavery, giving her away to the Dothraki like some sheep for an army. Daenerys' life was hard, and she had to be a survivor through it all, adapting to her circumstances and finding strength in herself.
I have been sold like a brood mare. I've been shamed and betrayed and defiled. Do you know what kept me standing through all those years in exile? Faith. Not in any gods. In myself.
It's because of this tough upbringing that Daenerys opposes slavery so much as a ruler and aims to be a queen who protects the weak. Daenerys is fierce and determined about this throughout her rule, but even in her determination, she has flaws. Daenerys is naive and impulsive, stubborn, and very quick to anger as well. However, you can see how her background has shaped this personality, so it makes sense given everything that's happened to her. The point is, George R. R. Martin doesn't make Daenerys a perfect girl boss with no flaws. He writes her as though she is a human being, complex and morally gray.
Well, I think the heart of all good fiction is character. And when I look at the real world and I look at real people, I don't see cardboard heroes. I don't see villains who get up in the morning like a comic book and say, oh, let me do evil today. I see people who are driven by their own demons and their own dreams. I see very complicated people who have the capacity in them to be heroes and the capacity in them to be villains, to do evil, to do selfish things, and frequently in the same person.
Rhaenyra, on the other hand, grew up the opposite of Daenerys. She was raised in the Red Keep as King Viserys' only child, surrounded by splendor and luxury her whole life. In the book, Viserys is described as more of a jubilant party animal who hosts lavish feasts, banquets, and tourneys. As a child, Rhaenyra often accompanied him during these events, delighting the court with her precociousness and beauty. She could be charming and clever, and the singers constantly praised her, dubbing her the realm's delight. Rhaenyra was undeniably intelligent, and all accounts agree on that, but she was also a spoiled, arrogant, and haughty child. These are her flaws, and they define her character. In the novel, She literally only wants the Iron Throne because her dad promised it to her, and her ambitions for the crown are based on a sense of entitlement. She doesn't care about the well-being of the small folk or anything like that, because she never spent time around them, nor did she ever want to. In fact, Rhaenyra has a disdain for the lowborn in the book. She has a superiority complex and believes that she is better than them. On the show, she dines with the dragon seeds and breaks bread with them. But in the book, Rhaenyra would have never let these people anywhere near her. In Fire and Blood, it's actually Jace who decides to accommodate them. So you can see how Rhaenyra could not be another version of Daenerys Targaryen, because the characters had different upbringings and therefore should have different personalities to reflect that. Daenerys had a hard childhood marked by poverty and enslavement, whereas Rhaenyra was a spoiled princess who grew up in luxury and affluence. Rhaenyra has nothing in common with Daenerys Targaryen, and rather has more in common with the historical figure that George R. R. Martin based her on, Empress Matilda. Just like Rhaenyra, Empress Matilda grew up in the splendid court of the German king Henry V. She too lived a life of splendor and opulence as the empress of the vast German Empire, which stretched from Germany to Jerusalem. Since the emperor was mostly away trying to maintain his grip over his vast kingdom, Matilda would sometimes rule as regent in his stead, tasting the very heights of political power. She was, therefore, cunning, politically astute, and she could be very charming as well. However, the politics of the German court were also very cutthroat, so she also needed to be strong and cold in order to survive. When she finally came to England to be her father, Henry II's heir apparent, no one could deny her political prowess. However, chroniclers noted that the reason why people were so turned off by her was because of her insufferable arrogance, her personality which the Englishmen of the time just couldn't bear. And this was the historical inspiration for Rhaenyra's character in The Dance of Dragons. It's obvious that the writers of House of the Dragon didn't like this sort of parallel, or they weren't even aware of it, so they just decided to model Rhaenyra's character on Daenerys instead. However, Daenerys and Rhaenyra are way too different from one another to ever be comparable in any way, and the true model for Rhaenyra's character is really Empress Matilda of England. The writers of House of the Dragon misunderstood Rhaenyra's character, reshaping her into something that was way too different from George R. R. Martin's original portrayal. They were uncomfortable with the idea of Rhaenyra, a queen of ruthless ambitions, so they turned her into a girl boss. They replaced her ruthless motivations with a sense of duty to fulfill the prophecy of ice and fire, making her appear more noble and likable to the audience. They removed her desire for revenge for the death of her son, replacing it with a ruler who is understanding, merciful, and just. They whitewashed her character, removing her flaws and moral ambiguity, and ultimately making her less compelling and getting rid of her agency within the story. In trying to create another version of Daenerys, the writers overlooked what made Daenerys so fascinating to begin with, her flaws and her imperfections. Instead of focusing on what made Rhaenyra unique and interesting, they turned her into a one-dimensional, boring character, sacrificing the depth that truly made her so remarkable to begin with. If they had embraced Rhaenyra's original complexities, then perhaps the story would have been more exciting and compelling in the second season of the show. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Let me know down below in the comments section and hit the thumbs up button if you liked this video. Thank you for watching. Peace.